The Spitfire was indeed magnificent. Its sleek, elliptical wings and powerful Rolls-Royce Merlin engine made it the darling of the British press and the nightmare of German intelligence briefings. Luftwaffe pilots received explicit instructions to identify and engage Spitfires preferentially, viewing them as a primary threat to German air superiority. Meanwhile, German reconnaissance photographs plastered on briefing room walls predominantly featured Spitfire silhouettes, with intelligence officers drilling bomber crews on how to distinguish the curved wingtips from other RAF fighters. This fixation would prove to be one of the Luftwaffe's greatest strategic errors. According to records preserved at the Imperial War Museum in London, RAF Fighter Command possessed approximately 520 Hurricanes, compared to roughly 340 Spitfires when the battle commenced. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, commanding Fighter Command, understood mathematics that the Germans apparently did not. Numbers mattered. The Hurricane, designed by Sidney Kim and first flown in November 1935, might have lacked the Spitfire's graceful aesthetics, but it possessed qualities that would prove invaluable in the grinding attritional warfare ahead. The Hurricane's thick wings housed 8 Browning machine guns, the same armament as the Spitfire, while its construction told a different story. While the Spitfire featured an advanced stress-skinned metal construction, the Hurricane utilized a traditional fabric-over tubular steel frame design. This seemingly antiquated approach meant that ground crews could patch up bullet holes in hours, rather than days. Battle-damaged Hurricanes that would have permanently grounded the Spitfire were often flying again. Before sunset, maintenance crews at forward airfields loved the Hurricane. It was robust, forgiving, and remarkably resistant to combat damage. Flight Lieutenant James Nicholson, who would later become the only Fighter Command pilot to receive the Victoria Cross during the battle, flew Hurricanes. So did squadron leader Douglas Bader, the legless ace who would become a legend. But their aircraft remained in the shadows, their achievements attributed in public consciousness to the more photogenic Spitfire. The German obsession with Spitfires meant that Hurricane formations often approached enemy bombers with a crucial element of surprise, their pilots exploiting the psychological blind spot that Luftwaffe crews had developed. 15th of August, 1940. This day would be remembered as Black Thursday by the Luftwaffe, the largest aerial engagement ever fought over Britain. Luftflotte 3 had 5 launched coordinated attacks involving over 1,800 sorties. What German planners failed to anticipate was the wall of Hurricanes that would rise to meet them. Squadron leader Peter Townsend led No. 85 Squadron's Hurricanes into action that afternoon over the Thames estuary. As his formation climbed through broken cumulus clouds at 12,000 feet, Townsend spotted the first wave of Dornier Do-17 bombers, the Flying Pencils, as RAF pilots called them, surrounded by a protective screen of Messerschmitt Bf 110 heavy fighters. The Dorniers were heading toward RAF Kenley, one of the crucial sector stations that formed the backbone of Dowding's defense system. If Kenley fell, the entire defensive grid would begin to collapse. Townsend's radio crackled with the calm voice of ground control. Bandits, Angels 1-5, Vector 090. He acknowledged and pushed his throttle forward, feeling the Hurricane's Merlin engine respond with its characteristic throaty roar. Unlike Spitfire pilots, who often engaged the escorting Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters in swirling dogfights, Hurricane squadrons had received specific tactical instructions: ignore the fighters when possible and destroy the bombers. This doctrine reflected harsh strategic reality. A bomber destroyed meant factories, an airfield saved, while a fighter destroyed merely meant one less escort for tomorrow's raids. The Hurricane's solid construction and stable gun platform made it ideal for bomber interception. As Townsend dove on the Dornier formation, his 8 Browning guns converging their fire at 250 yards, he demonstrated the aircraft's primary virtue: it was a bomber killer. The Hurricane could absorb punishment while delivering devastating firepower into the thin aluminum skin of German bombers. Spitfires might dance elegantly with Messerschmitt 109s at 25,000 feet, but Hurricanes did the brutal, unglamorous work of shredding bomber formations at 15,000 feet and below. Flight Lieutenant Richard Hillary, who would later write the haunting memoir The Last Enemy before dying in 1943, described the Hurricane as a lorry compared to the Spitfire's sports car. Yet this lorry was destroying German bombers at a rate that would have shocked Luftwaffe intelligence had they known. German bomber crews, briefed to fear Spitfires, often failed to react quickly enough when Hurricanes appeared. The psychological advantage proved significant. A crucial second's hesitation before taking evasive action meant the difference between survival and a fatal burst of machine gun fire tearing through cockpit and engines. By nightfall on the 15th of August, RAF Fighter Command had claimed 182 enemy aircraft destroyed, with actual losses closer to 75 German aircraft still a devastating blow to Luftwaffe confidence. Hurricane squadrons accounted for the majority of these victories. Yet the evening BBC broadcasts and next morning's newspapers spoke primarily of Spitfire pilots' gallant defense. The pattern was established. Spitfires received the glory, while Hurricanes did the killing. Squadron records held at the National Archives reveal the disparity. Number 43 Squadron, flying Hurricanes under squadron leader Caesar Hull, claimed 26 confirmed kills in August 1940 alone. Number 85 Squadron, also Hurricane-equipped, added 35 victories. These numbers eclipsed many Spitfire squadrons, yet public recognition flowed in the opposite direction. The pilots themselves seemed unconcerned with publicity. They were too busy fighting for survival to worry about newspaper headlines. 18th of August, 1940, the Luftwaffe designated this day the hardest day, and for good reason. Both sides would suffer their heaviest losses of the entire battle. The strategic choreography of Fighter Command's defense had evolved into a desperate ballet, with Hurricanes and Spitfires playing distinct but complementary roles that German planners failed to appreciate. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commanding No. 11 Group responsible for defending southeastern England, had refined his tactical doctrine through brutal trial and error. When radar stations detected incoming raids and ground controllers scrambled squadrons, Park deliberately assigned his fighters based on aircraft type. Spitfire squadrons received orders to climb high and engage the escorting Messerschmitt Bf 109 fighters, preventing them from diving on the Hurricane squadrons below. Meanwhile, Hurricane units were directed to attack at medium altitude where the German bomber formations flew, typically between 12,000 and 15,000 feet. This tactical division exploited each aircraft's strengths. The Spitfire's superior rate of climb and high-altitude performance made it ideal for intercepting the Bf 109s, which typically flew to 3,000 feet above the bombers. The Hurricane's ruggedness and devastating firepower made it the perfect bomber-destroyer. Yet this elegant tactical system remained largely unknown to the British public, who imagined all RAF fighters engaging in swirling dogfights without distinction. Pilot Officer Geoffrey Page of No. 56 Squadron discovered the Hurricane's resilience firsthand on the 18th of August. His Hurricane took cannon fire from ABF 109 over Canterbury, the explosive shells shredding fabric and puncturing fuel tanks. Flames engulfed the cockpit, forcing Page to bail out with severe burns. Yet the Hurricane had held together long enough for him to escape its tubular steel frame, refusing to disintegrate under punishment that would have destroyed a more lightly built aircraft. Page would eventually return to combat duty, scarred but alive, owing his survival partly to the Hurricane's robust construction. According to the Royal Air Force Museum's documentation of the battle, such incidents occurred repeatedly. Hurricane pilots walking away from crashes that should have been fatal. German bomber crews developed their own understanding of the tactical reality, though their reports rarely reached higher command intact. Hauptmann Wilhelm Raab, commanding a Heinkel He-111 unit, wrote in his journal about the appearance of Hurricanes when the square-winged fighters arrive. "We know the real attack begins. The elegant fighters with curved wings seem more interested in our escort, but those sturdy aircraft with straight wings, they come for us specifically." This passage, preserved in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, reveals what German aircrews learned through bitter experience. Hurricanes were their primary executioners. The day's losses proved devastating for both sides. The Luftwaffe lost 69 aircraft, including bombers that would be nearly impossible to replace quickly. Fighter Command lost 34 aircraft, but, crucially, only 13 pilots killed. The kill-to-loss ratio favored the defenders, and Hurricane squadrons had claimed the majority of bomber kills despite flying in more dangerous circumstances than their Spitfire counterparts. Yet when Winston Churchill rose in Parliament days later to praise the few who defended Britain, public imagination fixed on Spitfires. 7th of September, 1940. The Luftwaffe made its fatal strategic pivot, abandoning attacks on RAF airfields to bomb London instead. This decision, prompted by Hitler's rage over an RAF raid on Berlin, would ultimately doom Germany's hopes of achieving air superiority. For Hurricane pilots, it meant a new kind of warfare, intercepting massive bomber formations over the sprawling city while hundreds of thousands of civilians sheltered below. Flight Lieutenant Brian Kincombe led No. 92 Squadron's Hurricanes into the maelstrom that afternoon. The sight that greeted them over the Thames would remain seared into survivors' memories for decades. Wave after wave of German bombers Heinkel He-111s, Dornier Do-17s, and Junkers Ju-88 stretched across the sky in formations that seemed to darken the sun. King Kong counted over 300 bombers in the first wave alone, escorted by perhaps 200 fighters. Against this armada, Fire Command could muster barely 250 aircraft. The mathematics seemed impossible, yet the Hurricane pilots dove into the bomber formations with grim determination. King Kong selected a Dornier flying in the middle of a tight Vic formation, closed to 200 yards, and pressed his firing button. The Hurricane's 8 Browning guns, each firing 1,100 rounds per minute, pumped a river of lead into the bomber's starboard engine. The Dornier dropped out of formation trailing smoke and flames. One more aircraft that would never reach its target. King Kong banked hard left, narrowly avoiding a collision with another Hurricane whose pilot had similar intentions. The scale of the assault overwhelmed Fighter Command's carefully planned defensive system. Ground controllers struggled to vector squadrons against formations that simply kept coming. Radio frequencies became saturated with urgent calls, bandits, bandits, bandits. Wing Commander Tom Gleave, now leading numbered 153 Squadron, found his Hurricanes engaging Heinkel bombers over Woolwich when a Messerschmitt Bf-109 dropped on them from above. Cannon shells smashed into Gleave's Hurricane, and within seconds he was fighting his burning aircraft to the ground, sustaining horrific burns that would require years of reconstructive surgery. Yet even as he fell, other Hurricane pilots pressed home their attacks. The public narrative that emerged from this desperate day focused on Spitfire heroics. Newspaper photographs showed graceful Spitfires banking against cloudy skies. BBC radio broadcasts interviewed Spitfire pilots exclusively, cementing their image as Britain's primary defenders. Yet squadron records tell a different story. According to comprehensive analysis documented in the official RAF history compiled after the war, Hurricane squadrons claimed 73 confirmed kills on the 7th of September alone, compared to 41 by Spitfire squadrons. The disparity reflected tactical assignment. Hurricanes attacked the bombers while Spitfires tangled with escorts, but also numerical superiority. There were simply more Hurricanes in the air. German bomber crews who survived the gauntlet over London reported their experiences with stark clarity. Unteroffizier Hans Schmallerhaldi, a Heinkel dorsal gunner, later stated in an interview, "We feared all British fighters, but the Hurricanes came for us with a determination that suggested they took our attacks personally. They would press their attacks through our defensive fire until they were within 100 meters. Many times I thought they would simply collide with us rather than break off." 15th of September, 1940. This date would forever after be commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, the turning point when the Luftwaffe's ambitions crumbled against unexpectedly fierce resistance. The RAF claimed 185 German aircraft destroyed that day, an exaggeration born of the fog of war and multiple claims for single kills. But the actual figure of 56 destroyed aircraft still represented a catastrophic blow to German planning. Goering's promise of air superiority lay in ruins, and Hurricane pilots had delivered much of that defeat. Wing Commander Douglas Bader led the Duxford Wing 5 squadrons, including 3 Hurricane units into action that afternoon. The concept of big wings, combining multiple squadrons into a single overwhelming force, remained controversial. Critics argued they took too long to assemble, allowing German bombers to strike targets unopposed. Proponents insisted the concentrated firepower devastated enemy formations. Regardless of the strategic debate, the Duxford Wing's Hurricanes proved devastatingly effective when they arrived over London. Bader, flying Hurricane number 204, spotted a formation of Dornier bombers approaching the city from the southeast. He waggled his wings, the signal for the wing to attack, and dealt with 60 aircraft following him. The German formation disintegrated under the assault. Individual bombers, overwhelmed by attackers from multiple directions, broke formation and scattered. Some jettisoned their bombs randomly, trying to gain speed for escape. Others held formation and died together as British fire methodically destroyed them one by one. Within 10 minutes, the neat German formation had become a scattered mob of individual aircraft fleeing for the Channel. Pilot Officer William Walker of No. 242 Squadron, flying his Hurricane in Bader's wing, pursued a damaged Dornier across Kent. The bomber's rear gunner fired desperate bursts that punched holes in Walker's wings, but the Hurricane's sturdy construction absorbed the damage. Without affecting control, Walker closed to 100 yards and fired a sustained burst into the Dornier's port engine. The bomber nosed down and crashed near Maidstone. its crew killed on impact. Walker returned to base with his Hurricane resembling Swiss cheese. Yet it flew perfectly. The ground crew passed the fabric that evening, and Walker flew the same aircraft next morning. The statistical reality of the battle became clearer as records were compiled in subsequent months. Fighter Command's operational records, now preserved at the National Archives in Kew, show that Hurricane squadrons destroyed approximately 1,360 enemy aircraft during the Battle of Britain, while Spitfire squadrons accounted for roughly 930 kills. This meant Hurricanes claimed nearly 60% of all confirmed victories, despite often receiving less favorable tactical assignments and rarely appearing in propaganda materials. The reasons for this disparity were multiple. First, simple numbers: there were more Hurricanes available. Second, tactical doctrine directed Hurricanes primarily against bombers, which were easier targets than the nimble Bf-109 fighters that Spitfires engaged. Third, the Hurricane's stability as a gun platform meant that average pilots could achieve hits more consistently than in the latter, more sensitive Spitfire. Finally, Hurricane squadrons often operated closer to the bomber's typical altitude, reducing climb time and allowing more interceptions per sortie. October 1940. As autumn arrived and German bomber raids increasingly shifted to night operations, the daylight phase of the Battle of Britain drew to a close. The statistics were being tallied, and an awkward truth emerged for the Air Ministry's propaganda department. Their carefully cultivated Spitfire mythology bore little resemblance to actual combat. Results: Flight Lieutenant James Lacey of No. 501 Squadron had accumulated 28 confirmed kills, making him one of the highest-scoring pilots of the battle. He flew Hurricanes. Squadron leader Archie McKellar of No. 605 Squadron claimed 21 victories, all in Hurricanes. Wing Commander John Mungo Park scored 14 confirmed kills without ever flying a Spitfire. These men, and dozens like them, had become lethal aerial warriors in the unglamorous Hurricane. Yet the British public could barely name them, while Spitfire pilots received invitations to social events and newspaper interviews. The disparity troubled some senior commanders. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, whose No. 11 group had borne the brunt of fighting, understood perfectly well that his Hurricane squadrons had done the heaviest lifting. In an internal memorandum dated October 24, 1940, preserved in Park's papers at the Churchill Archives Center, he wrote, "The Hurricane units have performed magnificently and deserve far greater recognition than they have received. While I understand the importance of maintaining public morale through celebration of the Spitfire's undeniable qualities, we must not allow this to obscure the Hurricane's decisive contribution." German intelligence finally began to grasp what their bomber crews had been reporting for months. A Luftwaffe assessment document from November 1940, captured after the war and now held in Allied archives, contains a revealing passage. Previous intelligence estimates significantly understated the numerical superiority and combat effectiveness of the Hawker Hurricane. While the Supermarine Spitfire represented the primary focus of our tactical planning, post-operational analysis suggests that Hurricane-equipped squadrons accounted for the majority of our bomber losses. Future operations must prioritize the destruction of Hurricane units. This belated recognition came too late to affect German strategy. Hitler had already postponed Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of Britain, indefinitely. The Luftwaffe had failed to achieve air superiority, and that failure rested significantly on the wings of aircraft they had systematically underestimated. The Hurricane, dismissed as obsolescent by some German analysts who fixated on the Spitfire's superior specifications, had proven that combat effectiveness involved far more than maximum speed and rate of climb. Individual Hurricane pilots began receiving recognition as the immediate crisis passed. Flight Lieutenant Eric Nicholson received the Victoria Cross for continuing to attack a German bomber, even while his Hurricane burned around him. Squadron leader Tom Gleave, still undergoing painful treatment for his burns, was awarded the Distinguished Service Order. Yet these individual honors could not dispel the broader public perception that Spitfires had won the battle. Newsreel footage continued showing predominantly Spitfires. Ministry of Information posters featured Spitfire silhouettes. The propaganda machine, having invested heavily in the Spitfire narrative, found it impossible to reverse course without appearing to have misled the public. November 1940. The Battle of Britain officially ended as Hitler redirected Luftwaffe resources toward the planned invasion of the Soviet Union. Fighter command had prevailed, though at significant cost. 544 aircrew killed and 422 wounded. Nearly 1,800 aircraft had been destroyed on both sides. Britain survived her most desperate moment, and the hurricane had been the primary instrument of that survival. The Air Ministry faced a peculiar problem in the battle's aftermath: how to acknowledge the hurricane's decisive role without undermining the Spitfire mythology that had proven so effective for public morale. The solution was characteristic British. Compromise issued general praise for fighter command while allowing the existing public preference for Spitfires to continue uncorrected. This decision, while politically expedient, would distort historical understanding for decades. Winston Churchill's famous speech declaring "never in the field of human conflict" was so much owed by so many to Sophie made no distinction between aircraft types. Yet popular interpretation assumed he referred primarily to Spitfire pilots. Churchill himself flew in a hurricane in May 1941 to experience what the pilots had endured, suggesting he understood the aircraft's importance. But his public statements maintained careful ambiguity. The mythology had become too powerful to challenge. Hurricane production continued throughout the war, ultimately totaling 14,533 aircraft, compared to 20,351 Spitfires. Yet the hurricane's combat career increasingly shifted to other theaters and roles. In North Africa, hurricanes carrying bombs and rockets proved devastatingly effective against German tanks. In Burma, they defended against Japanese air attacks and provided close air support for ground forces. On Malta, hurricane squadrons held the line until Spitfires arrived in sufficient numbers. The aircraft that had saved Britain became the workhorse of the empire, serving reliably in climates and conditions from Arctic Norway to tropical Singapore. German military historians, freed from wartime propaganda constraints, produced more accurate assessments. General Adolf Galland, who commanded Luftwaffe fighters during the battle, wrote in his post-war memoirs, "We made a critical error in focusing our intelligence and tactical planning on the Spitfire while underestimating the Hurricane. The sturdy Hawker fighter destroyed more of our bombers than all other cousins combined. Had we recognized this earlier and adjusted our tactics accordingly, the battle's outcome might have differed." Galland's admission highlighted a broader lesson about intelligence failures and confirmation bias. The Luftwaffe had decided the Spitfire was the primary threat based on its impressive specifications, then interpreted all subsequent information through that preconceived lens. Reports from bomber crews about devastating hurricane attacks were rationalized away or attributed to Spitfires through misidentification. This systematic error cost Germany dearly, demonstrating how even sophisticated military organizations can blind themselves to uncomfortable realities. The surviving hurricane pilots watched this historiographical distortion with varying degrees of amusement and frustration. Some, like Douglas Bader, actively worked to ensure hurricane achievements received proper recognition. Others, like Bob Doe of No. 238 Squadron, who claimed 14 victories in hurricanes, simply got on with their lives, secure in the knowledge that those who mattered, their fellow pilots and commanders, knew the truth. 21st century, more than 80 years after the Battle of Britain, historical scholarship has finally corrected the popular mythology that emerged during the war. Access to comprehensive combat records, German archives, and rigorous statistical analysis has established beyond doubt that hurricane squadrons accounted for approximately 60% of German aircraft destroyed during the battle. Yet the Spitfire remains the iconic symbol of British resistance in popular imagination. The reasons for this persistent mythology are complex and revealing. The Spitfire's elegant aesthetics made it photogenic and cinematically appealing. Its technical sophistication satisfied a public desire to believe British engineering could match German industrial prowess. Most importantly, the Spitfire arrived at a moment when Britain desperately needed symbols of hope and defiance. The aircraft fulfilled that psychological need so effectively that facts became secondary to emotional truth. Historian Dr. James Holland's research, documented in his comprehensive works on the Second World War, demonstrates the statistical reality with forensic precision. His analysis of squadron combat reports, cross-referenced with German loss records and contemporary documentation, confirms that hurricanes destroyed roughly 1,360 enemy aircraft compared to 930 by Spitfires during the crucial July to October 1940 period. This 60-40 split directly contradicted the public perception that developed during and after the war. The hurricane's relegation to secondary status in popular memory represents more than simple historical injustice. It illustrates how wartime propaganda narratives, however necessary at the time, can ossify into permanent historical mythology resistant to factual correction. The Air Ministry's decision to emphasize Spitfires served legitimate morale purposes. in 1940, but the narrative proved impossible to revise once established. Subsequent generations absorbed the Spitfire myth through films, books, and commemorative materials that perpetuated the wartime propaganda, long after its strategic purpose had expired. Yet the pilots who flew Hurricanes in 1940 needed no historical rehabilitation to understand their achievement. They had lived through for months of desperate combat, knowing every morning might bring death before sunset. They watched friends die, suffered wounds both physical and psychological, and persevered through exhaustion that modern observers struggle to comprehend. Whether their aircraft appeared in propaganda posters mattered little compared to the knowledge that they had held the line when holding mattered most. The last Hurricane pilots passed away in the early 21st century, taking their memories of those desperate summer days with them. Wing Commander Tom Neal, who survived 98 combat missions and hurricanes during the battle, died in 2019 at age 97. His memoir Gun Button to Fire provides one of the most honest accounts of hurricane combat, stripped of romanticism, but filled with respect for the aircraft that carried him through impossible odds. Neal's generation understood what historians would later confirm. The Hurricane won the Battle of Britain, while the Spitfire won the publicity battle. Modern airshows typically feature both Hurricanes and Spitfires, allowing spectators to compare them directly. The contrast remains striking: the Spitfire's grace versus the Hurricane's solid purposefulness. Yet knowledgeable observers recognize that elegance and effectiveness are not synonymous. The Hurricane's workmanlike appearance concealed qualities that mattered more in combat: reliability, survivability, and devastating firepower delivered by a stable gun platform. These virtues destroyed German bombers far more effectively than aesthetic appeal ever could. The Battle of Britain Memorial at Cape La Fern overlooks the English Channel, honoring the 2,937 aircrew from 17 nations who served in fighter command during those crucial months. The memorial features a seated pilot gazing toward France, but no specific aircraft type. This inclusive symbolism acknowledges what the evidence demonstrates. Victory required both Spitfires and Hurricanes, operating in complementary roles according to their respective strengths. Yet if one were to apportion credit based purely on enemy aircraft destroyed, the Hurricane deserves the larger share. The final lesson of the Hurricane story extends beyond military history into questions about how societies remember and commemorate their past. The Spitfire mythology persists not because historians dispute the facts, but because popular memory resists revision. Once established, historical narratives acquire cultural momentum that facts alone cannot overcome. The Hurricane pilots might have claimed 60% of the kills, but the Spitfire claimed 100% of the mythology. In the court of public opinion, that disparity has proven remarkably resistant to correction, reminding us that the truest history and the most popular history are not always the same thing. The Hawker Hurricane saved Britain, while the Supermarine Spitfire saved Britain's imagination, both achievements worthy of remembrance, though only one reflected numerical reality.